Yeah, thanks everybody for the welcome and great to see a good turnout. Just before I share my screen, because I'll only be able to see nobody once I've done that, but we've also got my colleague here, Kate, from the Chartership office. So I think Kate will probably share a few links as we go along. So I think the format we've proposed is I've got a sort of condensed-ish version of my Chartership talk just to run through with you. But I think the key focus for this session is we've gathered people who are all hydrogeologists here, and I know that you want to hear about sort of some specifics about applying as a hydrogeologist. So we're lucky to have with us, as you've already gathered from the preamble chat, we've got Sue from WSP, we've got James Dodds from EnviroWater, Alex Crow from MOTS, and then we've also got Rory Cripps, who I think is also from MOTS, who was chartered last year, I think, was it last autumn?
Yeah, last autumn. Yeah.
So it's all very fresh in his memory. He's been through the process quite recently, and I know he's got some stuff to share with you as well, which obviously stuff I can't share due to GDPR. I can also see we've got Phil Merrin here. So Phil, you might be welcome to chip some comments in later, because I know you've been through the process not that long ago as well. So let me just share my screen. Hopefully you can see my slide. Let me just shrink some stuff. Oh, I lost everybody now. Excellent. Right, I can't see anybody anymore. I know, let's get rid of, there we go. Okay. Right, so we know who we are and we're all here. Splendid. So just for a bit of background, I joined JOLSOC in 2022. So previously I was also a hydrogeologist, actually in environmental consultancy. I started out with NTEC back in 2005, which became AMEC. I think it's become Wood, WSP, can't keep up. And then I moved to JBA Consulting in Yorkshire in 2016. And then I actually gained my own chartered geologist status in 2020. So obviously I've got my own experiences to draw on, as well as from my current role. So, but yeah, great to sort of share some advice from others in the process, the assessors, the recently chartered fellows. So you're not just sort of hearing from me. So just sketched out a few key headings, bit of background. It's always worth just pointing out for these talks as well that yes, it's aimed at candidates, those of you looking to apply, but if you are looking to be a mentor or supporter for your colleagues, it's also really good to make sure you keep up to date. We're not making wholesale changes, but we do refine the application process from time to time. So if you're completely new to thinking about chartership, or someone's prompted you about it, I always think it's worth a reminder about sort of what really is chartership, what is it about. We offer chartered geologist, which is our own, and we also are licensed by the Science Council to award chartered scientists. I think in the sort of chat just there at the start, Sue was discussing there about that decision-making process, about which one that you apply for. We can sort of come back to that, I think, later on. But the thing just to note here that they are accreditations of equal standing and merit. So the way I like to think about chartership is that having completed your higher education, whether that's undergrad or postgrad, chartership is then an important professional milestone. So your educational background gives you your sort of technical knowledge of your specialist area, or even perhaps at the forefront of that area of science if you've done a PhD or even spent time working in academia. But being chartered gives you a formal qualification that validates your competence at applying your knowledge in a practicing professional capacity. So you might have a good academic grounding in one area. Chances are that your professional role, whether it's in academia or in industry, has either evolved into a specialist niche, or it's perhaps an area of expertise with a lot of crossover to other disciplines. So a whole degree doesn't probably exist for what you now do, and chartership provides a way to evidence that expertise now that it's evolved over time. So being a professional geoscientist is not just about your level of specialist geoscience or scientific knowledge. I've listed the key strengths that having chartered status demonstrates to others. So it's also about your presentation skills, your appreciation of ethical behaviours, and implementing rigorous health and safety. In many areas of geoscience, it constitutes a stepping stone to becoming a recognised competent person, or perhaps a further qualification in your area. Maybe not so relevant for hydrogeology, but examples include RoGEP, or perhaps being a silk practitioner in contaminated land. I know there's a bit of crossover there with hydrogeology. So aside from the evidence for credentials, what are the benefits to becoming chartered? I've listed out a few here. Increased pay and recognition by your employers are a tangible benefit. I know it's something that a lot of employers support, but some of the benefits are a bit harder to quantify. From a personal point of view, I found that pulling together my chartership was a really valuable experience in reflecting on what I'd actually accomplished in my time in consultancy. What was I good at? Where did I need to develop further skills, both professional and technical? So chartered status is relevant to anyone across all the geosciences. So whilst we have the name geologist in the name for our society and the chartered geologist option, any aspect under the umbrella term of geoscience or earth sciences is included. And we do recognise and promote the ongoing development and expansion of what constitutes geosciences. So don't think that chartership is not for you just because you don't consider yourself an out-and-out geologist like Sue's husband, brandishing a hammer and hitting rocks and peering at them with a hand lens. But in terms of eligibility, firstly, you do need to be a fellow of the society, and presumably everybody here is if you're a member of the Hydrogeological Group. So this is accessible to anyone who's got a degree in geosciences or related subject, or who is employed in a role where geology is a key component. And then secondly, you need to be able to meet the chartership competency criteria. So we don't specify a minimum number of years of experience any longer, but typically we would say this is 5 to 6 years post-master's level. And for people who don't have a master's level qualification, we also offer a master's equivalence route so that you can provide a report as part of your application to demonstrate you're working at or above this level. So in terms of the application and review process, we've got an online form and there's a number of documents to be included within this. We've got 4 deadlines per year for when you can submit, and these tie into the annual cycle of council meetings, which is where recommendations for chartership, election to chartership are made, so through that council structure. So there's a roughly 3-month window between the submission deadline and the next council meeting, and that gives us enough time to go through the review process. So your chartership assessment will be peer reviewed by a panel of 2 assessors who will decide if your application demonstrates the competencies needed for chartership, and then you'll be invited to validate this at an interview. And I've put there, you've got a short presentation to include, unless you're applying for the chartership via the 20+ years of experience route, and then your presentation is a little bit longer, say half an hour rather than 15 minutes. So I've already mentioned competency criteria. It's one that I say quite a lot, but it's the absolutely central factor for gaining chartership is to demonstrate that you meet these criteria, and not just to show us how good you are at your day job. So start with those. If you're new to thinking about chartership, I'd recommend you go and read each of these criteria in a bit more detail. And it's key to make sure that you answer the question and not just tell us about your life in geoscience. What is it that the assessors are looking for you to show them? So I've summarised the criteria there. Regardless of your area of expertise, if you're going for chartered geologist status, you need to show that you've got the geological grounding and knowledge basis that underpins your specialism. And that's really important to consider in roles where there's a lot of multidisciplinary crossover, for example, between engineering geology and hydrogeology, or hydrogeology in contaminated land. You do need to be able to demonstrate that geological knowledge base in those first two criteria in particular, and not just show us, as I say, how good you are at your day job. For chartered scientists, there's 5 criteria. The way that they're written, they're a bit more generic, because they obviously can apply to a wide range of sciences licensed by the Science Council. So in terms of geoscience knowledge, there's actually no requirement per se to demonstrate this geological competency. However, if you're applying for CSci with GeolSoc, chances are you'll be working in some aspect of earth sciences, perhaps even if that wasn't your original background. So I've just lined them up there to show sort of how they map across and the similarities between the 2 charterships. And I've circled there in orange the ones that, if you like, indicate someone's professional practice beyond their technical knowledge area. For those of you who are going to be supporters or mentors, it's worth pointing out here that you may spot the word sustainability in criteria 4. This was something that was incorporated into the regulations last year, so it's definitely worth refreshing yourself on the details in the criteria. So keep those criteria in your mind, and where I'd recommend that you start is collating a portfolio of your work over time. So your professional competency is going to be tested by the presentation of this portfolio. The other key place to start is recording your CPD. It's not just a CV of the projects that you've worked on, it's about recording your learning points as you go along and reflecting on your experiences. So to be honest, we'd recommend doing this the moment that you leave higher education. It really allows you to take charge of your own career progression and provide a bit of structure, both as you move towards, through your early career towards chartership, but beyond this as well. And that's whether you move between employers or remain in one place for some time. And then the third key thing is to get a mentor at each career stage. So somebody with greater experience than you who can provide you a bit of steer and anticipate what might benefit you and what pitfalls to avoid. If you've got a mentor who is also chartered, they'll be in a great position to help you judge whether you're eligible and when you're ready to apply. It's quite tempting to have the same person to be a mentor and a supporter, and that's somebody that's going to complete a supporter statement to go with your application. This is often your line manager, and whilst they should know you well, it can be really beneficial to have a mentor who can be unconnected from your daily work pressures and help you stand back to give you that outside perspective on your career progression. So just to take a whistle-stop tour through different parts of the application, as I mentioned, the form is based online, and this will lead you through what you need to include. So on the form, you're going to be selecting your area of expertise, which is the area that your assessors will focus on to demonstrate the competencies. So this should be the area that you're currently working in or planning to work in. So if you've changed careers within geoscience, it doesn't mean that what you did before doesn't count for anything. It's helped pave the way and help you build up your experience and knowledge base for where you are now. But the area that you select is 1 or at the most 2. You'll need to provide your supporting evidence for. So you can select 2 areas if you like. You do need to be able to demonstrate them equally. It's not a major one and a minor one. One of the key documents you're going to include is your professional report. So this is probably the place I would start. You kind of know what you've done in your career and in your life, and you can start getting something down on paper easily, even if you need to refine it later. But you do need to cross-reference it to these chartership criteria. It's not just a potted history of your life. Use it to show us why you should be a chartered geologist or chartered scientist. In the main part of the form, there's a section for each of the competency criteria. This you can use to show us how what you've done demonstrates the criteria being asked for. It's a couple of paragraphs each per criteria. And then CPD records, you'll be submitting attachments for those as well. So it's a minimum of 3 years of records. Hence, it's a good idea to have this sort of as you go along and not just something that you try and prepare when you realise you're going to need it to put it in for your chartership application. You need to get in the habit of doing it because once you are chartered, you do need to maintain your CPD for as long as you wish to remain chartered. It's not like earning your degree. that you have those letters against your name for life. You do need to meet some criteria of CPD records and staying a member of JOLSOC in order to hold your chartership status. And the thing with CPD, it's not just a list, as I say, of what projects you've done or what webinars you've attended. It is your whole learning and development process. So this might be broader than what's on your company training record in terms of what things count as CPD. So get used to thinking about it in a plan, act and reflect approach. And we've got a whole webpage dedicated to CPD with lots of guidance and sort of templates that you can use. Or you can log it online through My GSL. It's up to you how you choose to record it, and we've just tried to provide some options for everyone to use. And of course, if you want more ideas for formal training opportunities, do check out our webpage for training courses. So these are aimed at everybody approaching and beyond chartership, and we're continually expanding on these. So do keep your eye out on our social media for announcement of new courses. So just to focus a little bit more on CPD, I said there's a lot of guidance online, including this mind map, this spider diagram. I won't go through all the detail here. It's just to let you know that it's there and that you can get the gist that there are various categories and then suggested activities that feed into those. So it's worth just having taking the time to have a bit of a look about what counts as CPD. You'll probably be surprised at the range of activities that are relevant. You're probably doing some and didn't realise it did count as CPD. But if you kind of give these a bit more thought, you can really use it to help you plan ahead on where you want to gain experience. It does go without saying, as a top tip, record it at the time you did it. Otherwise, you'll never remember it all later. So later this evening, go online and update your GSL if you're recording your CPD there. So supporting documents, this comes back to your portfolio. You can include up to 6. It needs to have a cover page and they need to be a maximum of 30 pages long. We've got a guidance document online to give you some ideas and sort of more detail about what we're looking for. But if you can, retain some of the documents of projects you've been working on. If your employer will let you keep a copy of your report that you were prepared, then great. If not, can you redact it with their permission? Sometimes there's confidentiality issues, but there are different ways to sort of get around this. For example, you could write your own summary of the project that you were doing and provide insights into the geological processes and how you applied them. And that way, if your client report that you prepared didn't need to include a conceptual cross-section, this is something you can then prepare for your chartership application. It's probably something you did as part of the work that you sort of prepared. It's just that you might not have included it with your client report. So yeah, it doesn't have to be the original report. And also if you've got these documents that you've prepared at the time, it does make it much easier if you move employers in the future as well. So your supporter, they're going to provide a supporter statement. So what we're looking for with your supporter is that they should know your work for at least 3 years, and they should also be chartered, ideally in the same chartership accreditation that you're applying for. And that way it gives a degree of confidence that they understand the criteria, that they've been able to support your chartership application from the start. It's not just somebody who's going to sign things off sort of at the very end. We used to ask for 2 supporters. As I say, it's only now 1. But that's not to say that you can't have more than 1 supporter. So, for example, I know people working in smaller companies, sometimes they don't have somebody who's also chartered, or if you've moved employer in the last 3 years, then it's appropriate to maybe look at having a second supporter. As I say, they should have provided support throughout your application and really helped you pull together your choices of documents that we're going to include. It is really obvious when the supporter hasn't been involved, and it's really important they haven't just signed it off at the 11th hour. So in terms of what happens next, you're going to submit it online and you'll get sent a link that you can share with your supporter. They've then got a 2-week window to provide their supporter statement. In the Chartership office, Kate, myself and Donna, we go through all the applications and check that they are compliant with all the submission requirements and that everything is complete. And once that process has been done, you'll get an acknowledgement, so you know what's going to happen next. And in the meantime, we're then pairing up all the assessors who are going to review these applications in that round and issuing the packs out to them. So once these are all checked and the assessors have had a chance to complete their initial review, they're going to decide whether or not your application is ready for interview. So I think, as we were sort of discussing at the start, we are looking for the documents themselves to demonstrate all those criteria, and the interview is then there to validate your application. We don't want to leave a lot of gaps and uncertainties to the interview stage. Otherwise, it leads to a little bit of a sort of stressful time for yourself if the assessors have got to be a lot more probing to sort of try and close out some of those gaps. So sometimes the assessors will ask for a bit more information if they feel like there's some gaps, but reading from your documents, they think you're probably ready to be going through to interview. Or if not, and they think you need to sort of have a wholesale refresh of your documents, or perhaps you need to gain more experience, they will look to postpone your application instead. This is much better to do this at this point than to go to interview when you're not ready. If you're not successful at interview stage, that's when we refer to it as a defer, and it goes through a defer review process. If that decision's upheld, you would then need to apply again from scratch and pay the fee again. So it's much better to make sure that you're really ready to go to interview with your application pack. And if a postpone is needed, that's the better way around to do it. So on the day of the interview itself, as I say, the elections for Chartership have to formally go through council, and that's the election date that's listed on the webpage that corresponds to the deadline that you submitted for. So it doesn't matter how far ahead of the deadline it went in, you're then all into the same kind of schedule. So you won't find out at the end of the interview. The assessors aren't able to tell you that. It does have to go through this process. But then once the council meeting has happened, we let everybody know the next day, and you can then go ahead as a chartered geologist or chartered scientist. So thank you very much for your time. Happy to have some questions. I think I tasked each of the three assessors with providing some comments on perhaps each of the criteria and the sort of things that they have seen in applications that they've reviewed. But I think, and then we've also got Rory, who I know has also got a short presentation sharing some examples of what he went through. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
I was going to ask a question. The qualifying period of experience is round about 5 years, give or take something, depending on what you've done. Does it matter if you apply 7 years or 10 years or 15 years? Was that an issue? Do you have to apply sort of 2 days after your 5th anniversary?
No, not at all. So as you know, we do have a slightly different application route, for example, for candidates who've got more than 20 years of professional experience. And the main difference for that is due to the length of their career, it's often difficult for them to get sign off on aspects of their career that are reaching sort of 20 years ago. But I think the key thing that is, regardless of how many years experience that you've got, the bar is the same for everybody. It's there to show a competency level that is chartership standard. It's not there to judge whether whether your career reflects what the assessor thinks is 15 years of experience or 5 years of experience. People progress at different rates, and the key thing is whether you've met those competency criteria. And I think that's something that sometimes the 20 plus candidates perhaps misjudged. You know, they know they've got 20 years of experience. They think they're going to sail through, and they forget to, as you say, answer the question and demonstrate how they meet those criteria. The bar is the same for everybody.
Thank you. I've got to be careful today because there's two people on this call that I was their scrutineer for. So I'm glad I've gone first because it'd be interesting to see what they say. I won't say who they are, but they know. You asked me to give some thoughts, particularly on core competencies 5 and 7. 5 is a clear understanding of professionalism and the code of conduct, and 7 is the competency in your area of expertise. So, what, from a personal point of view, and having done scrutineering for probably more years than I can remember, I think 5. Professionalism code of conduct is the easiest competency to demonstrate, and the reason I say that is because if after 5 years or 7 years or 8 years or 10 years working as a professional hydrogeologist, whether it's in private practice or in environment agency or wherever it is, if you're not professional in that period, then you've got a real problem. Yeah, and I've certainly never done a review of somebody that isn't professional because they would know they're not professional, they wouldn't apply. So I don't think it's something to get too stressed about, the professionalism thing. Yes, you have to demonstrate it, but by virtue of your application, yeah, it's almost guaranteed it will be professional. I think the key things on professionalism, particularly at interview, and it's where it comes through, is at interview, the professionalism. It's about just showing that you care about your work, basically, and the profession that you're working in. Be prepared for your interview. People do turn up ill prepared, and it doesn't go down well. Be on time. That was more the case when we did it face to face, but even online, be on time. If you're doing a PowerPoint presentation, and the vast majority of people are now because it's online, get somebody to proofread it. Putting up your first slide with a spelling error on it shows a lack of professionalism. Etc., etc. So it's those basic things that really make it. The code of conduct is a short document. Certainly in the interviews, and again, it comes through in the interviews. In the interviews I run, it's not an exam on do you know the code of conduct. What would be the point in that? We're all grown-ups. We don't have to memorize the code of conduct. What we do need to do is know it's there and understand that it's important and understand that it's what it covers. Certainly the interviews I've run and been involved in, whether I'm the lead interviewer or the second person, where we've always focused is on ethics, because ethics, the ethics of consulting or whatever we're doing, the ethics of professionalism is difficult. My big advice is don't be holier than thou. Yeah, because ethical issues come up in everybody's careers. There isn't a career that somebody hasn't gone, I'm not really sure about this. Yeah, and the critical thing is understanding and recognizing that happens, and then what you do about it. Yeah, and it's about transparency. It's about communicating with your colleagues, whether it be colleagues that sit around you, internal colleagues, external colleagues, or whatever. But it's about understanding that ethical dilemmas can come up, and they have to be dealt with in an appropriate way. Unfortunately, Even in the world of geology and hydrogeology, nothing's ever simple. Competency 7, in my view, and I think I've heard it earlier, the chartership process isn't reliving your degree or your master's degree. It isn't a test of Cruiseman and Derrida, or my bookshelf, if it still exists. I've still got Freeze and Cherry and Better. I don't know if anybody still uses those textbooks. It's not a test of whether you know what's on page 375. That isn't the purpose. The working assumption that we have as reviewers is that you know your stuff. You wouldn't be applying if you didn't know your stuff. So be confident in that you do know your stuff. And it's our job is to make sure that what you're saying you believe that is right. Yeah. And that really comes through in the professional report and supporting documents. Very easy to see in a professional document whether the author knows what they're talking about. And then what we're doing at the interview then is to explore those aspects. And if we see some weaknesses, and we all have weaknesses in our technical reporting, we'll explore them a bit. And oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that, or oh, I haven't explained it in quite the right way, and you talk around it, and you very quickly realise as an interviewer that the knowledge is there, it just hasn't been explained. Just going to give you two quick examples of that competency questions. The first one is the difference between chartered scientist and chartered geologist. And the applicant had submitted. We reviewed his report. It wasn't he. His reports, and we suggested, we fed back prior to interview that we thought he should change his application to a chartered scientist rather than chartered geologist. The work he was doing in hydrogeology was fine, but it seemed to us that there was a lack of understanding of geology. He chose not to do that and carried on with interview, and it became increasingly obvious at interview that the fundamental understanding of the geology wasn't there as a chartered geologist. Hydrogeology, we got hydraulics and groundwater flow and it was a contaminated land. So that was fine, but he wasn't the geologist. So just think about that. And as Eleanor said at the beginning, there's no difference in level between the chartered geologist and the chartered scientist. But don't go through the stress and waste your time going for the wrong thing. The second one, which I'm going to skip one, and I've just thought of another one. I did this. I did this quite a long time ago. It was even before COVID. It was so long ago, and a bit before that. And it was another chap, and it submitted the pack, and he had a very narrow range of experience. He'd been doing it quite a long time. It's 10 years plus, but a very narrow range of experience. And he'd done a lot. It's almost his entire career was on geotechnical work related to road pavements, testing, sampling, quality control of road pavements. Really narrow. And I was the second interviewer because it's not particularly my specialist area, but all of my specialists. And we were quite worried about this. Did he meet the criteria? And the criteria then were similar to now. And we recommended him for chartership. And the reason we did that is because while his experience was narrow, it was very deep. He had a lot of expertise and knowledge about what he did. And he totally recognized the fact that his knowledge was narrow. That was fine. He wasn't purporting to be anything that he wasn't. And while there's quite a lot of discussion about how we should deal with it, we felt satisfied that he was professional in the way in which he understood his role. He was a good geologist, did all the other stuff, and he recognized that his chartership, if you like, covered quite a narrow range. So don't feel you have to be an expert in everything. You don't. What you need to be is professional in what you do and recognise the range of where you sit in the hydrogeological space. Shut up, James. I can see how
no, that's great, James. Thank you very much for that. That was that was really helpful. I can't remember who I asked to do what, Alex or Sue. Do you want to go next, Sue? I think.
Yes, you did ask me to talk about effective communication in writing and orally, competence in health and safety, and there was another one as well. So, so what I would say actually is that our competency, so a competency 3, effective communication in writing and orally, is a real big overlap with what James Dodds was just talking about. So you've got your professional reports, you've attached them to the application, and I find it easiest if you actually talk about how your technical reports demonstrate how you are effectively communicating in writing and orally. So, I mean, as geologists, we all sort of started out with colouring in maps and drawing up cross sections and drawing pretty pictures of things. So, we love to see that actually. The effective communication is all about, drawings of conceptual models and sections. And one of the particularly good examples that I saw, the applicant wrote specifically about what was contained in their professional reports. He included and specified the use of hydrogeological conceptual models to explain flow mechanisms, paths, etc. We love that, a really good visual look at what he's doing. Cross sections, conceptual hydrogeology, as well as the written text. And he'd read through everything, and there was perfect clarity in what he'd done. Really good. No typos, no grammatical errors, and so on. He'd actually even included some hand-drawn cross sections, pencil, rubbing out a lot, just little sketch maps and things like that. And I really like that. His professional report. So he had the professional report, and he had added on a kind of front piece just discussing the geology in a little bit more detail. That kind of links back onto what Eleanor was saying earlier. And another example he provided was, he did this piece of work. He then presented it to a client, and he talked about that, and he talked about how he'd done that. Of course, there's also your presentation during the interview, and James talked about this, where you put up a slide and there's like the title of the slide has this whacking great big typo in it. I come across this all the time. I don't know why this happens. I think people get a little bit of a block on what they've done. So please get a colleague to just have a quick look over your presentation for you. I think it's actually really good if you practice your presentation as well, particularly if you don't have much experience in presenting things. So another example, so your presentation during the interview. And another example is an applicant was able to demonstrate a range of situations where they tailored their presentation to the audience. So they'd use different methods of presentation depending on what the audience was. And they were actually a STEM ambassador as well. And they talked to children of school age, they talked to site management, project managers. They demonstrated the use of different materials to do that. Remembering, of course, that your professional reports, we don't like to see template reports, we like to see nice, written reports. And we also like to understand who exactly has done, what's actually in the report. I think I come across that in one of the other competencies. So basically, cover notes provided with the reports provide us with an invaluable explanation of the report, particularly when you might not have done the full report, you might have just done sections of it. So just kind of give us a pathway through the report. We need to know exactly what your involvement has been. Were you on the ground doing the drilling? Were you supervising the drilling? Did you supervise the project? Were you doing, did you have somebody else do the field work? Sections, graphs, explanations. So, you know, you could say, we looked at this data and I'm going to present this data in this particular way because of this reason. So another competency, so competency 4 deals with knowledge and implementation of health and safety issues. Management, environmental and sustainability issues, Health and Safety at Work Act, 14,001, waste transfer notes and their importance and so on and so forth are really important with you're dealing with contaminated land, particular remediation, dig and dump, that kind of stuff. Knowledge and implementation of other statutory obligations applicable. What health and safety training have you had? Can you demonstrate that health and safety was considered from the commencement or even pre-commencement of the project? Highlight exactly which projects demonstrated health and safety issues. Did you have to do a stand down? Did you have to say send the drillers home because they didn't bring hard hats, things like that? Were you unhappy about any aspect of the field work that was going on? So a really good example demonstrated this particular applicant was so sound. He demonstrated his ability to identify the hazards. He recommended control measures to be implemented on site, specified PPE, wrote method statements, and made sure that people basically followed the specifications. He gave some really good examples of safety procedures, and he gave a description of how these were followed on site. Hydrogeologist as well, particularly somebody working in contaminated land or mining, would be expected to consider the environmental implications of their work. And a really good application talked about those, you know, basically the above bullet pointed points that I've just made. And they put them in the context of the sites that they had looked at. I was actually wondering how we can implement those in if we were only looking at computer models. And I'm sure that James Dodd would have some ideas with this. Could we look at safety and design? Could we look at prediction of inrush, for example, with mines? Could we look at the prediction of, for example, say, use of, say, carbon sequestration in mine tailings, that kind of thing? Looking at commitment to CPD, so that was that was something else that I looked at. I had 2 applicants, very different. The first applicant really demonstrated the plan, do, review. Plan, act, reflect. I think of it as plan, do, review. And because you need to demonstrate that you are actively learning through your career. It's not, you know, I mean, I did my degree like 30 years ago or something, and I've continued to carry on learning. And it's a really important thing that as a professional, you carry out CPD and you carry on learning. So you need to demonstrate that you're actively learning throughout your career. And I really did like this with one of my candidates. He recorded his CPD. He provided details of all this self-reflection on what he had learned. And you know, and you need to think about that as the do review. So always think do review, plan, do review, actually. Now, I didn't examine that particular applicant's application to planning, but with another applicant who did not necessarily demonstrate the review particular point in their application, we did discuss this during the interview. And what I found during the interview was that they had a really firm idea of where their career was going, what next piece of CPD they were looking at. So that's you know, that's something else. Now I've just seen something flash up on the messages and so on. Now don't forget, with your professional reports, you can redact particular points. So feel free to redact particular points within the professional report. Very unlikely that the geology will be a confidential issue, but certainly you might want to redact things about the client and things about, say, mineral reserves, all that kind of stuff. So yes, I mean, I had the two very different examples of, you know, strengths within the review of their career. Somebody who really had it planned out where they were going, somebody who did review, and that person also very likely was also sort of planning out where they were going. When you've looked at those competencies, so looking at all those competencies throughout your report, so going through all your professional reports, and demonstrating those competencies within your validation report, it's actually really helpful if you can kind of write, you know, 3 paragraphs on each of those competencies. And then once you've written those 3 paragraphs, you'll know, I think you've got a really good idea of whether you are ready for interview. And, you know, I mean, as I think it was James has said, you know, if we do have concerns, you know, it might be a case of, yeah, we'll request some other information. When you are there in your interview, we are looking at it with a view to you to approving your application to be chartered. So we are looking positively at you once you've got to that stage. Is that good, Eleanor?
No, that's great. Thank you very much.
Whistle-stop tour.
No, that's great. Thank you, Sue. I'm just conscious of time, and I want to make sure that Rory gets a chance to share his notes that he's got with us. So I'll just go to Alex next. I think you were looking at criteria 1 and 2. And I think just if you can give some sort of key takeaway points for hydrogeologists to think about in terms of covering criteria 1 and 2 for CJOL, that would be great.
Yeah, that's great. So I will keep this very short and sweet. I would focus on things like cross sections, conceptual site models. We like a visual. Remember to use conceptual site models that have got a water table on. Think about which way your water table is going. You know, your assessor is probably going to be a hydrogeologist, so they'll be looking for that. Don't be afraid to produce supplementary drawings or things that aren't in the report you gave to your client. That gives you the opportunity to emphasize things, to pick out particular competencies, you know, label things that really matter to you. I think those are my top tips, really. Do something visual. Don't be afraid to do something, you know, specific for your chartership application if you think that helps you tell the story. And that's the stuff that's really made a difference. I guess the other thing I would emphasize is this is your opportunity to talk about pure geology, talk about that depositional environment, how that affects the permeability of the deposit, how has it changed through time, was there some interesting diagenesis? You know, have you got something like the chalk where the you know, the glacial environment and the erosion and the paleo landscape has made a real difference to how the transmissivity distribution varies. You know, have a think about things like that. It's think about the variations through time and space, as well as what's there now. Try to avoid, I don't know, rectangular models with horizontal lines where you've got a block of made ground sitting on top of a block of RTD, block of river terrace deposits over some homogeneous aquifer. That tends not to be very interesting. That's my very short set of tips.
No, that's perfect. Thank you very much, Alex.
Can I just make one really quick point on that, because it's come up so many times over the years, particularly in hydrogeology, is on key criteria 2 in the phrase generate predictive models. That does not mean that you have to be an expert numerical modeler, groundwater flow modeler,
exactly.
Contaminant transport modeler. It's about using geological information or hydrogeological information in our case to make predictions. That could be a groundwater contour map, because you're predicting ahead over there and data over here. It could be hydrograph data where you're predicting what may happen next year based on what's happened in the last 5 years graphically. So, but don't get fixated on the fact that it says predictive models is numerical models.
No, that's a good point. Thanks
Unless you
very
claim
much,
to be a
James.
numerical model.
Well, then you should definitely include some if you are. That's great. Thank you very much. Rory, are you able to share your screen and go through the notes that you've got? Because I know I got to see these beforehand, but I think people will find these really interesting. I'm not sure if you're still on mute.
Yeah, is that coming through now?
Lovely. Yeah, no, that's great.
Cool. Yeah, so I'll go through my chartership journey. Just a bit about myself. I'm an engineering hydrogeologist at Mott MacDonald. I've currently got 9 years experience. Started off at Exeter University, Camborne School of Mines, doing applied geology. Took a bit of a gap to travel around South Korea for a bit, and then came back to England to do the Birmingham Masters. After that, working for a contractor with Stuart Well Services as kind of their in-house hydrogeologist, helping out with dewatering system design and implementation. Moved across to Southern Water, so acting as a client, looking after the wells in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and then come to be a consultant at Mott MacDonald, working on HS2 and currently working on Lower Thames Crossing. So a bit of quite a variation in my career, which I was having to pull together for my chartership application. So through my kind of career, I tried my best to keep a CPD log. What I implemented eventually, which I wish I had done sooner, was set a time each week to update my CPD and consider the work that I'd done supporting my competencies. And actually, I found it useful to have my own spreadsheet that I kind of knew and just put stuff in and could update that as and when required. I also kind of plotted things on a geological timescale to kind of help me understand where everything fit, and working and seeing if there's any kind of periods that I might be lacking or bits that I kind of worked in, and it kind of helped me kind of organize it in my own mind and helping write the report as well. And then yeah, as a going, kind of had a vault of supporting documents, had everything, and then when I came to write my report, I was starting to kind of go through them, and as I went through my career and write my report, I found that there was stuff that I could pull in. So I wanted to try and cover all the competencies, make sure that I was the main author, so that I didn't have to start kind of taking stuff out or redacting too much. Trying to make sure that there was enough variety, so having the interpretation, risk assessment, some geological log, cross sections, some site descriptions to help people logging on site. Oh, went too far. But yeah, and also I wanted to show how my career progressed over my three jobs that I've had. Then I got to reporting, to the report writing. I did a very rough first draft, so I had a really good mentor in Richard Meller. I did a very rough first draft, which I was able to give to him, which he gave me lots of notes on that kind of put me in a better direction and kind of kicked the bad habits out before I got too far along the process. Actually, I was probably holding off a bit too much, so I wish I'd got to him sooner, and it would have made the process, would have gone and completed everything a lot quicker. But then once I had his review, I went through it in detail, and what I made sure was that every sentence was contributing to a competency. If it wasn't either leading to or explaining a competency, I got rid of it, and kind of was very brutal in that point. Then yes, the criteria overview, which was kind of, I was trying to struggle thinking, God, how am I've just written a report with all these competencies, now I've got to rewrite it, but then I realized that actually this was an opportunity to build on what I had presented in my report, and kind of able to provide the detail and supplement stuff that I wasn't able to get into the report. I could actually get into this criteria review. And then for submission, it was all the little bits that needed to be done. Kind of going through, creating all the cover sheets, creating all the CPD logs, also going back to get signatures for the work that I'd done previously. So I'd kept good links with previous employees to be able to make sure that. But it was still a bit. I still had to travel to their offices, but it's quite nice actually to see them and kind of get updates from them. Then once it was all submitted, then it was getting the presentation all together. My presentation, I made sure I wanted to focus on one project, so I wasn't having to introduce things over and over again. I split it up into 3 sections, and then had breaks in between to answer any questions. That kind of helped me that stuff that I just presented, I could then answer questions on, so I wasn't having to. I got to the end and then having to go back and trying to remember what I'd just done. Always coming back to the competencies as well in the presentation, making it clear what I've kind of covered, and clearly highlighting that. And yeah, that's everything.
Yeah, thanks, Rory. If you just go back to your last slide, I think just on the presentation one, I mean, clearly what you did was absolutely fine. I think just a comment that's come up in some of our discussions with assessors and feedback from candidates, some people are quite anxious about giving their presentation, and would like to run through it. They've practiced it to time, and so on. So just for the benefit of people listening, your assessors will, at the start of the interview, sort of ask you if you'd rather go through it in one go, or if they can ask you questions as you go along. So, don't feel you have to sort of do it one way or the other. It's you can make that work for you. And I think the other thing that you said there, you picked on sort of one project example that you could use to sort of cover the different criteria, which is great. And I think it's just worth a reminder for people that, the assessors have already read all your documents, so it's good to either pick a different project that you haven't used. As you showed, you had, as you called it, a vault of documents that you could sort of pull through to pick your 6 supporting documents from. And I'm sure for most people, they'll have more examples of work than they can actually use in their pack. So again, the assessors don't want to hear what they've already read, or, you could focus on some of the projects in the supporting documents, but bring out some different elements that demonstrate the criteria, but without repeating what was in the documents themselves. So just a couple of follow-on points there for people to keep in mind. But no, really, really great, Rory. Obviously, when I give chartership talks for GDPR reasons, I can't share the sort of information that you have. And it is the stuff that, I know that future candidates do find really useful. I think sometimes it does just seem quite overwhelming, like where to start with it. I think you've just set that out in a really nice sort of logical progression about how you went about it. So hopefully that gives people encouragement that they can just be systematic and start putting things together. You don't have to write the first paragraph perfectly. You just need to start getting documents together and thinking about those criteria, and what you might have sort of in your history that you can use to develop that. So I think, Kate, thank you. You've been answering some questions there in the background. I just wondered if there was anyone else with I haven't seen the chat, sorry. So are there any questions that still need answering, or are there questions from others on the call that they would like to ask?
I've got a couple of questions.
Do.
That's all right. So my first question was about online interviews. James mentioned that since COVID, there's only online interviews, is that right? Is there an option to do in-person interviews?
Yeah, so good question. So yes, the general principle is that we are doing all of our interviews now online. That said, if there's any accessibility requirements, EDIA considerations for either the candidate or for the assessors involved in a review to have an in-person interview instead, then please do let us know. We try to make sure we've given people the opportunity in the application to share those requests if it's something that they need, so that everyone does have the same opportunity. So the majority of the interviews are online, but it's not we're not restricted to that if it's appropriate to have it in person.
Okay, thanks. And if it's all right, I'll ask another question.
Go for it.
I think for IC Chartership, they have a requirement to have a certain amount of commercial experience, so project management, sort of bid stuff, if you're in a consultancy. Is that a requirement with JOLSOC, or does it help your application if you've got some commercial experience?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the sort of professionalism and I guess the which Sue was talking about, that James was talking about, and area of expertise. It's about recognizing where your professional limits are. It's not a prerequisite to show that you have ticked off a box that says you've got project management experience. I think if you look in the wording of chartered scientist, it's just nuanced slightly differently in terms of how it talks about your personal responsibility and your professionalism, but it's not an eligibility criteria to apply as such.
Okay, thank you.
We have a question in the chat from Maria. Hi, if you are applying for CJO and upon the interview process, you have been suggested that application should be changed into CSAI. Does this mean that you will have to start from scratch and undergo the CSAI review? Or is there another way for this?
So, good question. So, if you have been recommended to change from one to the other, what we would normally ask you to do is to update the documents that are specific to those criteria. So you might wish to tweak your professional report so that you're cross-referencing the new criteria. You will need to complete certainly the sections on each of the competency criteria, but we can sort of work with you about the best way to sort of implement that in terms of, it might not be that you need to sort of start a new application on the online portal, so we can look to sort of find more manual. It doesn't happen that often, so we're not there to be obstructive and ask you to go all around the online application all over again. It's just a case of updating the sort of relevant documents.
And I guess it would definitely be before the interview stage. We would let you know that this is a set that they think you should switch to CSAI.
Yep.
I had a question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering, for the supporting documents, should you sort of have one for each of the competencies, or should they all be focusing more on the technical side?
Great question. Thanks. The answer is no, you don't need to cover each single competency. So for chartered geologist, I would probably recommend that the predominant focus is sort of criteria 1, 2, and 7. But obviously inherently in that, you should be demonstrating your written presentation skills. If you've got a document that in itself isn't about health and safety or the environmental sustainability, but there's other aspects of that project that are relevant to that criteria, again, you could set those out in your cover note to sort of show how that all sort of pulls together. So we certainly don't want to see 6 sets of RAMs on a client templated format. Doesn't really show much about your understanding. And we don't really want to see 6 lots of phase 1 desk studies either. So yeah, it's trying to sort of balance that variety with your depth of knowledge, and that one way or another across your entire application that you have covered the criteria.
Right, thank you.
Can I just say something on that as well?
Sure.
Certainly you can talk about a number of different competencies with a single report. So you can talk about health and safety with in a particular field investigation, and you can also talk about professional ethics and things like that with the same field investigation. There's no reason why you shouldn't do that, and particularly in your validation report where you're talking about, sorry, no video, where you're talking about how you meet each of those competencies, then you can refer to, say, you know, SD1, SD2, whatever. So you can cover a few of those. You could cover a few different competencies with one report, but it you know, obviously it helps for us if you highlight those.
Yeah, we just, that the main purpose there of the cover note is really to don't leave it to the assessors to have to read between the lines about what you're trying to show them. You know, even if it makes it seem like you're
Totally
being
agree with that. Yeah,
really obvious, just absolutely signpost and make it, you know, even though we've set a page limit of 30 per supporting document, that's 6 lots of 30 pages plus the application form, plus it's a lot of paperwork for the assessors to go through. And the more you can helpfully signpost them so that they can review it as expediently as possible, and tick all those boxes, you know, to be satisfied that you meet the criteria and take you forward to interview stage, the better. I think, James, did you have something to add there?
I was going to say essentially what you and Susan said. The way in which you do that, the way in which you link and signpost the information fundamentally shows your professionalism. Yeah, that report, you've identified the audience. In the olden days, stuff used to get sent to us in paper, and you would have boxes. People would send 200-page reports. The assessors don't go read it. Oh, why would we? We sat there on a Sunday afternoon with better things to do. What we're interested in is to be able to see that you're doing it. I have no problem in somebody sending a chapter from a report. It's often useful to have a little non-technical summary as well, so that we know the context of that chapter. But I wrote this chapter. You know, great, that's brilliant. Now tell me in the covering sheet that document which core competencies you want me to think about when I read that 10 pages with a couple of really good sketches and your development. I think take a lot from Rory's presentation. I'm sure Rory, your reviewers were rightly impressed with the work that you put into it. But you could see from Rory's presentation the amount of time and effort he put into producing what was ultimately a fairly simple, because it was well structured, set of documents. Now that doesn't detract from the amount of effort he went in to get to that, but he worked through a lot of information and simplified it to make it easy for the assessors. I think he won't be upset if I said I know that to be true. So when I
was working through it, was always make it easy for the assessor. If you can signpost things and so they're able to, tick, 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 tick. You want to make their lives as easy as possible.
Absolutely. Thanks. Are there any other queries or comments? Obviously, if you think of something the moment you've left for your tea, then you can drop us an email. Robert?
Hi, just a quick one, if you can hear me.
Yeah.
It's on the supporter, and having just changed companies, it's someone who knows your work for the last 3 years. So it's about who to choose. I think you did touch on it, but whether you, in that case, you would have 2 supporters.
Yes, definitely. I think yeah, if you've recently moved company, I would probably try and opt to have somebody from your current company, and ideally somebody from your previous company if you still have any connections with those. But if you don't, maybe look at getting somebody else in your current company. We don't want to be overly pedantic about it, but if in essence you can get 3 years worth of sort of working relationships combined, whether it's 2 assessors or potentially even 3, depending on the company where you are and if other people are chartered or not, that would be our recommendation.
Thank you. Cheers.
I've had people get things signed off by clients as well, where their relationship with the previous employer wasn't as great as it could have been. And that happens. And clients will, or the recipients of the reports, I say clients, I'm a consultant, but the recipients of the reports may assist you with them.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, James. Any other final comments? I know we've gone over the hour, so sorry for keeping people. No, I'll hand back to the chairs in that case.
Okay, thank you very much, Eleanor. Yeah, it's been a really great session, really useful. Thanks for everyone for coming. Yeah, like I said before, if you want to join the mailing list for the Early Careers Group, just let me know. Yeah, thank you and have a good evening.